Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Crawl, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about understanding and dealing with the pain and suffering of life. This comes from an article I wrote for my self-help site over a decade ago because, you see, I've lived a life of pain and suffering, which is why I turned to the world of self-help in the first place, because no one else seemed to be able to help me with it except for myself. And many men turn to self-help because of the fact that their lives are essentially not what they want it to be in some way or another, and they are oftentimes unhappy, depressed, and experiencing some form of suffering, even if it's emotional pain rather than physical. In fact, this is the reason why Buddhism is one of the most popular and prosperous religions today. Though this is not going to be a religious video, Buddhism centered itself around understanding and dealing with the suffering of life, which is something that people really need. The truth is that suffering is a huge part of life and is something that everyone has to deal with at some time or another, some people more than others, and sometimes more than others. And we are living in a time today where there is far more suffering than there has been in the other recent past times. And not ironically, suffering is something that motivates people to want to try to better themselves so that they can put an end to their suffering. And in doing this, it is important to not just try to replace your suffering and whatever negative or adverse experiences you're having in life with positive and pleasant ones, but to really understand the nature of your suffering and try to work on some sort of resolution to it, lest it become a pattern that returns. Then you can really begin to make your life what you want it to be, and not such a life of suffering, but rather one in which you're able to feel more of the ways that you want to. But first, before we can get to the pleasant feelings that we want to have, we must face our suffering. And so in order to do that, we must evaluate and analyze it and the concept of suffering. So to help you understand the nature of suffering in general, I have delineated it into multiple categories so that any form of suffering can be easily broken down into its constituent parts, such as its causes and effects and the like. That way it can be better comprehended and resolved. This is a model that may be applied to just about any situation. Firstly, let's talk about things that we would classify as pain. There's two types of pain, physical and emotional. All right, your pain could actually be both, and it can also start with one, which will then cause the other. Physical pain can cause emotional pain, and emotional pain can cause physical pain. This is due to the body-mind connection, as documented in books such as The Mind-Body Prescription by medical doctors such as Dr. John Sarno. This mind-body connection is one of the things that is well understood by good medical health practitioners. And I've found it very beneficial as someone who suffers from health problems and is also an athlete. So it is important to figure out whether your pain is rooted in one or the other, and if one is perhaps causing or perpetuating the other. So for instance, in my case, a number of my health problems don't always have to cause pain, but when I have emotional pain, that then causes flare-ups of these health problems, right? So for instance, if you are having a really painful acid reflux episode where you just feel like the acid in your stomach is burning a hole in your gut like a hot fucking cinder, eating Tums can certainly help. But you also want to look for the root cause, such as, is this really physical? Could it have been something I ate? Or could it potentially be psychological due to the extreme duress that I'm in? So maybe relaxing could really help. Maybe you need to relax your torso to allow more downward flowing movement. Now, there are two different types of what we call suffering: transient and self-perpetuating. It's important to know when you're experiencing a form of suffering that is situational and will soon pass, or if you're actually perpetuating your own suffering. For you see, all suffering has the potential to just be transient. However, many times people perpetuate their own suffering, allowing it to become an ongoing thing through their own focus on it with unhealthy mental processes, turning things like physical suffering into emotional suffering, which then perpetuates the physical suffering in a vicious circle, and unhealthy lifestyle choices, right, such as eating the wrong foods, which make the suffering worse, doing the wrong things that make your stress and your emotional suffering worse, making bad decisions for your physical and mental health that simply cause more and more suffering rather than making course corrections. So when you find yourself suffering, it is important to know whether it is something that is transient or is ongoing due to some form of self-perpetuation. Now, there may be times when you feel as though other things are perpetuating your suffering than yourself. And that may very well be. But what is most important here is to understand that you always play the primary role in your own state, and thus, your suffering, if that's what you are going through. And you can make healthy choices that are necessary to help cause it to pass, no matter what things outside of yourself may also be affecting you, right? Which you can choose to remove from your life. So you might be saying, well, it's this stressful situation that is causing me to be stressed out. I'm not doing it, but you are making a conscious decision to be in that situation, right? You could certainly remove yourself from it in most cases, even if that is a drastic measure, right? And whatever role you're playing in the situation, you could try to change. Are you choosing to change, or are you choosing to stay static and stagnate, which causes suffering? Next, there are two categories that pain and suffering fall into: the useful and lesson producing, and that without purpose. Here's an interesting way of delineating pain and suffering. Does it have a lesson for you to learn, or is it absolutely meaningless? It is important to learn from your suffering whenever possible, which will help you to not only resolve it, but ensure it never occurs again, at least in that same way, and that you can better yourself and your life from it. However, there are some forms of pain and suffering that simply cannot teach or benefit us in any way. So you absolutely must figure out if your suffering has something that you can learn and take away from it for your own betterment, or if it's completely useless. Once you've done that, you can either learn your lesson and apply it to your life for your own personal development, or not. And then, of course, just move on to overcoming it. For me, I've had stomach pain, as I mentioned, and that is my stomach trying to teach me a lesson about what things I shouldn't be putting into it. And it's basically helped guide me into the direction of the food selections I need to make and the diet I need to eat, which has been very beneficial to me as an athlete. So I learned a lesson from my stomach problems and the horrible pains and suffering that I went through with them. And the same went for my back pain. I've had back pain, and my back taught me how to take better care of it, what exercises to do, what exercises not to do, what stretches to do, what stretches not to do. These are the types of lessons I've learned from my pain. But not all pain has lessons to teach. Some of it is just stuff you have to try to either deal with, and grit your way through, or not, try to remove from your life, because it just has no good reason for it to be there. So why would you allow for it if you do not have to? And that brings me to the next thing, which is the two ways of overcoming pain and suffering. And the first is to simply try to ignore it and move on. And the second is to focus on it and work with the issue until it can be resolved or cured. This is a very important point here, because most people will only do the former option and not the latter. When ignoring your issue and simply trying to move past it is usually not the best way to do it, because ignoring a problem often doesn't make it go away. Right, so you can't move on, but rather it allows it to grow while you are not paying attention to it. There are cases where it's appropriate to simply ignore a cause of suffering and move past it, such as when the issue is transient, or when it is due to your own mental complex and should not be given focus to, because the focus is the problem. Or if it's something else that will really only be perpetuated by focus and will in fact go away if you do not focus on it, like with some but not all emotional problems and situational problems, and some minor pains and discomforts when it comes to physical issues. But when there is a problem that is causing you to suffer and will not go away when you just simply do not pay attention to it, you must then give your attention to the problem and work on it to fix the situation in order to resolve your suffering and cure it. No matter how much you may not want to think about or address and deal with the issue, you simply must. And as a matter of fact, the more you don't want to think about it and deal with it, the more of an indicator of how much you really need to that is. So just do it. If you have a broken heart, right, you need to really analyze that and what went wrong in your relationship and what caused it to end, or maybe what caused you to select the wrong person and what they did wrong to you, and what part you played in these issues and how you might have brought that upon yourself and can solve those problems so that you never do it again. All right, then you'll be able to move on without this problem coming up again at a larger capacity and causing you more suffering, like it's done for people like me who've had to go through a pattern of unhealthy and even abusive relationships and bad breakups and heartbreaks before finally figuring that out and learning how to fix it. In order to do that, you really need to analyze your issues, pick them apart, and try to get to the root cause. So next, let's talk about the two causes of suffering. Primarily, there are circumstantial limitations, things holding you back from feeling the way you want to feel, and behaviors and actions, things you are doing to have a negative effect on yourself. Now, these are not always separate. Sometimes you can have actions that have limited you, but oftentimes your limitations are not coming from yourself, but outside sources. Or other times, your actions may not be generally limiting, but will have produced some sort of unfortunate circumstance that caused you pain. So it is important to look at your situation and see whether or not your own actions have caused your pain and suffering, or if you are a victim of limiting circumstance. Many people suffer simply because they feel limited in their life, while many suffer because of their own behaviors, which hurt rather than help themselves. And again, sometimes it is your own behaviors and actions that produce a limiting lifestyle. So like with some of these other categories, these things aren't always going to have to be mutually exclusive. They may be occurring together in cooperation with one another, perhaps even in a self-perpetuating manner, as with the physical and emotional pain from the first category can do. These things can often occur together in a vicious circle, self-perpetuating one another. And it's important to understand these factors if you are going to solve the cause of your suffering and cure yourself of it, which is done either by changing your behaviors and making course corrections with your actions, or reworking your situation in order to free yourself from whatever outer circumstantial limitations you may have, or just removing yourself from the situation. Just like how both of these things may be a problem, you could also use two different solutions to suffering, which is what I'm going to go over next. The first is treating the symptoms and the feelings of pain. And then the second is curing the root causes and solving the issues. Not unlike the two ways of overcoming suffering, many people will only treat their symptoms and superficial feelings when they find themselves in pain rather than the root cause of it. However, as a health nut and athlete, I must stress the importance of addressing your root causes. For if you are not treating the problems that cause your suffering, how can it go away? Now, of course, while this is usually what is needed, there are some exceptions, actually. Obviously, if you are in pain, you want to treat the symptoms in many cases and try to get rid of the pain or numb it. And so oftentimes when the pain is bad enough, you will want to do both, solving the root cause and treating the symptom of the feeling of pain. Take the common headache, for example. I get a lot of those. Sometimes this will be caused by something which is transient, which you do not need to solve the cause of because the cause is already past, but the headache still remains for a little while, though it will go away eventually. Just like what happened with me yesterday. In this case, you'd only treat the symptom, of course. However, many headaches are caused by stress, lack of sleep, poor diet, and other unhealthy lifestyle elements, as with many forms of pain. And what you'd want to do there is to make sure you've investigated what the root cause of this pain might be so that you can try to solve that. Ideally before you treat the symptoms, to see if the symptoms then go away when the root cause is dealt with. All right, so for instance, when I get a headache, before I go popping some aspirin or Advil or whatever, I think to myself, do I just need to eat? Am I having low blood sugar? Do I need to relax? Do I need to take a nap? And almost 100% of the time, 99 point something percent of the time, that causes my headache to go away. And curing the root cause in these cases has always been more effective than trying to just make the feelings go away by popping an Advil or something. However, if you don't have time for a nap and that's really the cure that you need, then of course you might want to take some aspirin, and then you just have to try to plan on getting to bed earlier that night, as with a stress headache, for instance, or a headache induced by not eating or eating the wrong thing or being stressed out. Obviously, the stress and the toxins like cortisol, the stress hormone in your system, may sometimes be so much that your headache's going to be so bad that aspirin simply won't cut it. Though you may take one to try, you really do need to address all of these root causes as soon as possible, even if it has to be a little later because you're at work now. And I think that what's happening these days with the unhealthy lifestyles that many people are living and the great amounts of suffering they have because of it is that they will have days like this where they cannot treat the root cause, and trying to treat the superficial symptoms by doing things like taking aspirin just don't help. And since they're not able to treat the root cause, this carries into the next day and maybe multiple days after that. So it is very important to treat the root causes. You should really never be too busy that you can't focus on your health and wellness, especially if you have pain. And I think that most of the time you will be able to address a root cause without needing to treat the superficial symptoms, and that just simply making different lifestyle choices, especially food choices, will be the solution you needed, as most people's health problems do stem from their poor diet and other lifestyle choices. So for instance, if you had a hunger headache because you missed a meal or ate the wrong thing, why would you take aspirin when you could just eat something else? Eat something more healthy. So those are all of the categories to pain and suffering and how to deal with it. And as you can see, this model of the nature of suffering, you can easily delineate everything you need to know about a situation and the type of pain and suffering you are in to figure out how it works so that you can resolve it. And I know that if you apply this model to any situations you have in which you are suffering common pains, ones that aren't injuries that require real medical attention such as surgery, but the common types of suffering and pain that could be emotional such as depression or heartbreak, or physical such as headache, stomachache, backache, with the types of suffering that we have to go through on a daily basis these days. This model can usually help put a stop to it and help you to feel more of the way that you want to feel and live the life you want to live. That concludes this video. Thanks for listening. I hope I mansplained that good enough for you. If you like what you heard, please click the like button, and if you feel you gained some value from this video and would like to give some back, please do so with the PayPal link below, because your support helps fund me doing this work and fight the good fight for men like you. If you are ready to take the red pill and wake up from the matrix, well then, I have the perfect book for you. The Bible of Esoteric Knowledge is a super concise, dense, info-packed philosophy textbook, written in the same verse format as the Bible, but combining multiple different, highly esoteric philosophies such as Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, shamanism, ancient paganism, and a special balance between theoretical physics and metaphysics, along with some special bonus info on the cryptic secrets of sexuality and death. This book will stimulate your intellectual philosopher's mind like no other, especially since it's a lot shorter and easier to read than most philosophy books made up entirely of run-on sentences and never-ending paragraphs, and can be quite boring and exhaustive. Full of all the most fascinating mystical secrets of the universe, gratify your inner geek and quench your thirst for meaning with the Bible of Esoteric Knowledge. Get your copy at the link below for a special sale price today. Enlightenment has never been so easy.